Coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, you're listening to Mythic Radio.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7-8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
The first thing we saw was this winged creature, 14-foot wingspan at least. It was huge. It almost covered half the road.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Nick. Thanks for tuning in today. Today is Monday, August 7th, and this is episode 6. You can visit us over at mythicradio.com and share your own experiences by clicking on the Tell Your Story link. You can also get involved by joining our forums at mythicradio.com and by following us across all social media at Mythic Radio Live. Don't forget, you can find the Mythic Radio podcast on Spreaker, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, and YouTube, depending on where you prefer to listen. On today's show, I'd like to talk about a personal experience that I had and what really spurred me to create the Mythic Radio podcast. I've covered a few different topics in previous shows, but I think it's important that you know a little bit about my background. For as long as I can remember, the world of the paranormal has intrigued me and made me question everything that I believe to be true. Some of my favorite books growing up focused on paranormal and spiritual phenomena. I grew up in a fairly small town in Michigan, where Friday night football games were the big event of the week, and people hung out at the local Dairy Queen to get through the humid summer days. My friends and I always enjoyed investigating haunted cemeteries and buildings in order to possibly catch a glimpse of something out of the ordinary. Even though members of my family and friends had experienced unexplained occurrences at a younger age, I didn't have my first actual experience until I was about 14. Sure, I had seen shadows move out of the corner of my eye or felt as though I was being followed up the stairs of my grandparents' old basement, but they were little, insignificant experiences that I could always disregard as my mind playing tricks on me, or something of that nature. I mean, who hasn't at one point or another felt a little creeped out about entering a particular room or area that just seems to have a different vibe or some other weird feeling to it? Well, 9 times out of 10, you can chalk it up to your imagination running wild. But what about that one time when no explanation seems to make sense? For me, this is exactly what happened during the summer of 1995 at around midnight. I can't be more specific of the date and time, and I'll kind of explain more about that later and why. I was about 14, and my mother and I lived in a duplex in a rural area outside the city limits of Brighton, Michigan. Our daily routine played out as usual. Since it was summer break, I had spent the day at my grandparents' farm, which was about 10 minutes from where we lived, and my mother had worked her typical 9-to-5 shift. Afterwards, she picked me up and we came home, and she prepared dinner. As the sun went down, we did our typical thing. We watched some TV and talked about our day. And around 10 p.m., she told me it was time for bed. I brushed my teeth, got into bed, and took my glasses off, which I placed on the nightstand next to my bed. My mom came in and said goodnight to me, and she shut my bedroom door. By this time, it was around 10:30, and I wasn't exactly tired, so I laid there for what was at least another hour or so, just thinking about the day and staring out my bedroom window. My room had only one window, and my bed was in the opposite corner of the room from the window, which made it easy for me to look out and see the night sky, as well as my next-door neighbor's old, dilapidated farmhouse. As I said before, I had taken my glasses off after getting into bed, which made everything quite blurry. But I could still make out the moon and the stars in the sky for the most part. My neighbor's farmhouse had a couple large dead trees that stood on the north side of their property. These trees were very tall, and the branches jutted out in front of the moonlit sky, which made it easy to notice when a plane or satellite was moving off in the distance. As I lay motionless in bed, I noticed what looked like a star in the sky behind the branches of the trees. This object looked as if it was pulsating very slowly, as some stars appeared to do. It stayed motionless, going from dark to light and back to dark, for what seemed to be a few minutes. I was absolutely sure that what I was seeing was in fact a star, or possibly even an airplane, very, very far away. As I watched it, however, it looked as if it began to move horizontally, to the right. I used the large tree branches as a point of reference, and after a moment or two, I was convinced that it was moving. Now, what I will tell you is that it was a very calm night. There was no breeze whatsoever, so I know that the tree itself was not moving. I reached for my glasses and I put them on, thinking that my poor eyesight was to blame for this anomaly. As I put my glasses on, I looked back toward the window and again saw this star that was still moving very slowly. At this point, I was still convinced that it must be a satellite, but as I watched, it stopped moving. It then began moving horizontally in the other direction. It didn't move like a plane or a helicopter. It would stop and change direction instantly. I watched it do this back and forth movement for a few minutes. I just lay there in my bed, staying perfectly still, mesmerized by what I was seeing. I didn't know what to do or what to think. The light, which was still behind the tree branches and still appeared to be the size of a star, seemed to get a little bit brighter, but not necessarily closer. At this point, a piercing white light seemed to emanate from the object. This light came through my window and lit up the entire wall next to my bed, including part of the bed. It was like a strobe light or a camera flash. It happened so fast that I blinked after the light had already gone. Absolutely stunned by what I had seen, I looked out the window, but could find no trace of the object. I had an overwhelming feeling of being watched. It was like that feeling of turning around and realizing that someone's taking a picture of you, and you didn't even know that they were holding a camera there. It's hard to explain. I went to my mom's room and tried to wake her. I didn't know exactly what to say, but I just felt like I needed someone to be aware of what just happened. I couldn't fully wake her, and she rolled over and went back to sleep. At this point, I went into the living room and looked out the window. I still couldn't see the object, and everything seemed very peaceful, and I instantly became very relaxed, as if I'd taken something to calm down, which I had not. I returned to my bedroom, got into bed, and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and started my day as usual. It wasn't until a day or two later that I remembered what I had experienced. It's like I had blocked it out, and to this day I still have long stretches of time where I'll forget that it even happened until something reminds me of it. What bothers me the most about this experience is the feeling of my privacy being invaded. I thought that this object I was seeing was hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, only to have it shine a light directly into my window. What I also found odd is how I felt fear and anxiety one moment, and absolute peace the next. It was like someone flicked a switch in my brain. It's the best way I can describe it. This is the first time that I've put my experience down on paper, and I hope that my encounter will spur some other folks to come forward and share their stories. I have witnessed other unexplained events, as well as some paranormal experiences, but I'm going to save those for another episode. As always, I want to hear what you guys have to say, and I'd like to know if you've experienced a similar type of encounter. Please let me know. Thanks to everyone for joining me today, and I'd like to remind you that if you enjoy the show, please consider telling a friend about us. I also encourage you to visit our forums on mythicradio.com, where you'll find all the topics that we discuss here on the podcast. It's a great place to ask questions, share your own experiences, and start new topics on what interests you. If you have a question or story for me, you may contact me on social media at Mythic Radio Live, or click on the Tell Your Story link on mythicradio.com. I hope you'll join me on the next episode, as we'll be taking a look at the history surrounding a lesser-known creature of the paranormal called the Pukwudgie. It may sound like a cute and harmless Pokemon monster, but it most definitely is not. Tune in to learn more about this Native American legend. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time here on Mythic Radio.